few times in Scripture we see the phrase from the rising of the sun until the going down. But have you ever wondered where on earth this takes place? Now true, the sun will always be rising and setting somewhere at any given moment, but the day has to begin at one of these places, right? According to modern man, the day arrives in the western Pacific, east of New Zealand, does a weave around Kiribati, then splits the gap between Alaska and Russia. That's because the center point of Earth, or 0 degrees, was marked as Greenwich, England in 1884. And ever since, the international dateline has been 180 degrees from Great Britain, with a quirky exception in the middle. But is that accurate? Should Greenwich be the point that we center our day around? I don't mean to pick on England or take away New Zealand's early bird status, but biblically speaking, there's no scripture to support this location. So what are the other options? Some believe that the biblical day begins wherever the first new moon is sighted, and that changes from month to month. So one month the day may begin in North America, another West Africa, and another East Asia. But I don't think that's the dateline either, because our Father's ways are unwavering, unchanging. A day that constantly moves just doesn't fit that profile. On top of that, that would mean when the new moon is spotted first in the Americas, then they would be keeping the feasts such as Passover or Sukkot before Jerusalem. But when the moon is first spotted in, say, Asia, now the Americas are keeping the feast after Jerusalem. And to me, that kind of fluctuation just feels wrong. So the current dateline we have has no biblical backing, and a shifting day that corresponds to the moon just doesn't feel scriptural either. But there is a better way, and actually it's not too far off from our current dateline. We just have to shift the Greenwich starting point about 35 degrees east to the land of Israel. There's a few clues in Scripture, along with the Book of Enoch and Jubilees, that the land of Israel is the center of the earth, or specifically Mount Zion and Jerusalem. In Ezekiel, Jerusalem is alluded to being the center of the world, which adversaries rise against in the future, those adversaries being Gog and Magog. And we know it's speaking of Jerusalem because in Revelation, Gog and Magog surround the beloved city, which I believe is Jerusalem. Then, in 1 Enoch 25 and 26, an end-time judgment takes place in a valley that's in the middle of the earth. This may be referring to the Jezreel Valley, where the Battle of Armageddon is believed to take place. And if that's the case, look where it's located, almost directly north of Mount Zion. So we're still at that center point. Then there's the Book of Jubilees, which flat out calls Mount Zion the navel of the earth. Making it a little too easy, aren't we, Jubilees? I think we may also have confirmation of Mount Zion, or Jerusalem, being the center in the book of Matthew. Matthew 12:40. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the stomach of the great fish, so shall the Son of Adam be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. First off, I believe the heart of the earth is referring to Sheol, the dwelling place of the dead within the earth. That's a topic for another time, but this could have a dual meaning because where was our Mashiach buried? Jerusalem, or near Jerusalem according to John, and outside the gate according to Hebrews, because he was buried near the place where he was crucified. So perhaps, wherever it was, it's still considered the heart of the earth. There's 2 main candidates for where our Mashiach was buried for 3 days, either the Church of the Holy Sepulchre or the Garden Tomb. I'm not picking sides as to which one it is, because either way, look where they're located. Almost directly north of and in line with Mount Zion. So if Zion is the center, so was he. Though if I had to pick a single point that makes sense for being the center of the earth, it would be Mount Zion. While Jerusalem and Mount Zion do go hand in hand, I'm picking the peak. It's easier to calculate around, which means all we have to do is go 180 degrees forward on the map and we have the beginning of the earth. And maybe the beginning of the day as well. Let's see if it works. Here's the coordinates for Mount Zion. 31 degrees, 46 minutes, 18 seconds north by 35 degrees, 13 minutes, 43 seconds east. But for now, we're just going to focus on the longitude. And 180 degrees from this position is 144 degrees, 46 minutes, 17 seconds west. That's our line in the sand, or the ocean, because we're in the middle of the Pacific. But where exactly in the Pacific are we? Well, 10 degrees west of this line is the eastern tip of Hawaii. How about that? So maybe the day shouldn't end with the Aloha State, but begin with it. And what a great way to start the day, am I right? Also, this may align with more scripture. Not Hawaii per se, but the islands in the Pacific. Isaiah 41:5. The isles saw it and feared. The ends of the earth were afraid, drew near, and came. Isaiah 42:10. Sing unto Yahweh a new song, and his praise from the ends of the earth. Ye that go down to the sea, and all that is therein, the isles, and the inhabitants thereof. It appears that Isaiah is making a connection between islands and the ends of the earth. Now, while there's islands in every ocean, the Pacific has the most far-reaching ones, separated from the continents. So between that and its correlation to Mount Zion, I think it's a good fit. But I'll be honest, even though our line works for the start of the earth, for the start of the day, we may run into problems. For one, along the south of this line are the French Polynesian Islands. Some are east of the line, others are west of it, and for Tahanea, the line goes right through the middle. Now granted, this island is uninhabited, but if all the other islands begin keeping a biblical calendar, how difficult would that be to figure out? Then, to the north we have another big question mark, Alaska. Our line runs west of the Alaska-Canadian border, and actually it goes right through one town called Central. That's curious. So just like French Polynesia, it would be very difficult to figure out a correct biblical calendar if you're living on the line. But there may be a solution. It's a bit abstract, but it could remove our problems altogether, because there's nothing that says the day has to begin in a straight line. In Psalm 19, the end of the earth or the end of heaven also represents the circuit of the sun, and where the sun goes, the day goes. So maybe, when pairing these verses with Isaiah, we just need to work around the islands to find the start of the day. So for your consideration, I present the slanted date line. Here's how it works. Instead of just looking at the longitude for Mount Zion, which gives us this vertical line, now we're going to add the latitude at 31 degrees, 46 minutes, 18 seconds north. And from this point, we're going to tilt the line counterclockwise, slightly, until we reach an angle that doesn't cut any land in two, and hopefully still fits with scripture. Let's begin by looking north. Where does the mainland of Alaska end and the islands begin? That would probably be at Unimak Island, but there's hardly any separation between the two, so I don't think this spot will work for the start of the day. But it may work for the end of it, because just west of Unimak are the rest of the Aleutian Islands, about 19 kilometers away. This is where Alaska clearly shifts in island mode, starting at Ugamak Island. Went from Uni to Uga. And this spot here is exactly 200 degrees west of Mount Zion. That's precise. It creates a divide that's halfway between the two islands, about 5 kilometers from each. It may work. I'll check out the northern parts of Alaska later, but for now, let's see if this point can work as a date line. When connecting this spot to the point we marked, 180 degrees from Mount Zion, it's almost 3,000 kilometers and has an angle of about 333 degrees. Though degrees can vary on Google Earth depending on the distance, because it's calculating on a globed Earth, so keep that in mind. But somewhere between 330 to 333 degrees seems to be close. If we continue this path down to the southern hemisphere, things start to get interesting. The first islands to start the day west of this line would now be the Pitcairn Islands, with Ducie Island being the first. And to put Ducie's location in perspective, it's almost directly south of the westernmost point of the contiguous United States, off the coast of Washington State. Now, Ducie Island is uninhabited, but it's exactly 160 degrees west of Mount Zion, another multiple of 10, just like Hawaii is 190 degrees, and the gap in the Aleutian Islands is 200. That seems rather perfect, doesn't it? So this 330 to 333 degree angle seems to have potential as a biblical dateline. And also worth pointing out, the French Polynesian Islands are no longer split in two, like they were before adding the angle. Now they all sit comfortably to the west at the start of the day. I like it. Though if we're going with Isaiah, the islands are on the ends of the earth, plural. Not just one, but both. Could that also be referring to the ends of the day? Let's see. We could check that box up north with the Alaskan Islands, but down south, can we check it again? Indeed, because east of the line, we have Easter Island. You know Easter Island. It's the place with all those stone heads, called the Moai. That may be its claim to fame, but I think there's more to this island than just the statues. Today we call it Easter Island, but to the original inhabitants, it was called either Rapa Nui, meaning Big Rapa, or Te Pito Te Hanua. This one's intriguing, because depending on the translation of Pito, it can mean either the navel of the world or the end of the world. Makes you wonder what those statues really know. And real quick, let me just say that I believe there's a connection between biblical measurements and a metric system, because a biblical cubit, called an amma, is said to be half a meter. So you oftentimes see connections with meters and kilometers matching up with biblical numbers or whole numbers that are really interesting. So keep that in mind for this next part. Now, as for Easter Island's position, it's 144 degrees and 27 minutes west of Mount Zion. And 144 is one of those numbers that seems to appear around important locations. Check out my Watchers series and you'll see what I mean. But as for here, it could be due to 144 being a product of 12 and 12, just like there's 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night, like our Mashiach said. Are there not 12 hours in the day? Also, there's 1440 minutes in a day. And actually, the western tip of land around Easter Island is technically another island, a smaller one offshore called Motu Nui, and the edge of that island is 109 degrees, 27 minutes, 18 seconds west, which is about 14 minutes from the eastern tip of Easter Island, and 144 degrees and 41 minutes west of Zion. Even more, the slanted dateline I marked out intersects 1,444.8 kilometers due south of Motu Nui. And that's 72 degrees south of Mount Zion. So we have 144 again, and now we also have 72, which is half of 144. Boy, oh boy. So I think this could be a sign that Easter Island marks the end of the day, or at least the end in the southern hemisphere, and perhaps at this point south of the island, or somewhere near it, is where the day begins, before extending up toward Alaska. Which would mean the people who lived at Easter Island were right. It really is the end of the world. Unless they were calling it the navel of the world, then no, sorry guys. But I think they got it right. Next, I'm going to leave the islands for just a bit and go to the desert, because there's something else about this Easter Island longitude that caught my eye. Are you aware that Utah has a lot of arches? Arches National Park has 2,000 natural arches, and that's just the ones that are over 3 feet in width. The full number is said to be in the 3,000s. That concentration far outnumbers anywhere else on Earth. It's not even close. The second most is Rattlesnake arches in Colorado, with 35 arches, just to give you an idea. Scientists will tell you the arches are formed over millions of years, but I disagree. I think they were created just as they are and put at this very spot for a reason, for us to figure out. Personally, I look at arches as being like the doors of nature, a metaphor maybe of passing from one side to the other. So I wonder, is this the longitude where one day passes to the next? I say that because the most prominent of all the arches here, and perhaps in the world, is Delicate Arch, which is along the eastern border of the park. So it's one of the first to see the sunrise, and its longitude is 109 degrees, 29 minutes, 58 seconds west. That's almost directly north of where Motu Nui ends, only about 2.5 miles difference. Is it a sign? Are the arches declaring that this is where the day begins in the southern hemisphere? I'll let you decide. So as you can see, I find all these numbers, degrees, and islands to be fascinating. And now I've thrown Utah into the mix. But we're not done with the islands yet. We still have unfinished business in Alaska. So I believe the day splits between Uni and Uga, Unimak and Ugamak Islands, 200 degrees west of Zion. But then things get a little tricky. We can't maintain that same path, because if we do, we'll be plowing into Russia. But if we extend it to this spot here, which is 240 kilometers from the 200 degree point, I think the date line then goes vertical. That may seem like I'm breaking the rules, and maybe I am, but when it comes to the far north or the far south, the sun plays by a different set of rules. There may be 24 hours of sunlight or none at all, so that may affect how the day begins. But here's what I like. The numbers are still awesome. From this point, if we take the line upward at about 356 degrees, almost vertical, it fits perfectly through this gap, and it's the same distance from the edge of these two islands to the date line, 19.5 kilometers to Nunivak and 19.5 kilometers to St. Lawrence. Then it continues north, reaching the Diomede Islands. The Diomedes consist of two islands in the middle of the Bering Strait, Little Diomede belonging to Alaska and Big Diomede to Russia. They're only about 2.5 miles apart, and the current date line we keep goes right between these islands. But I think they should both be on the west of the line, the side beginning the new day. Here's why. On this line, it comes up from southern Alaska, which is about 1,100 kilometers by the way, is a very interesting point. 6 kilometers northeast of Little Diomede are these coordinates. It's 204 degrees west and 34 degrees north of Mount Zion, And 34 degrees when broken into minutes is 2040. So 204 degrees west and 2040 minutes north of Zion. I've decided to call this point 24, and it's where I believe the northern tip of the slanted dateline reaches. It started beneath Easter Island, which is 144 degrees west of Zion, multiples of 12. It ends here in the Bering Strait, point 24, multiples of 12 again. It's also exactly 44 degrees west of the start of Ducie Island, the first landmass that I believe experiences a new day. How about that? Also interesting, this latitude is almost the exact point where the midnight sun begins, at around 65 degrees 44 minutes. That's where the sun never sets during the summer solstice. Both of the Diomedes experience that phenomenon for 5 to 7 days in June. And with this line, that would mean the Alaskan islands of St. George, St. Paul, St. Matthew, St. Lawrence, and the Diomede Islands are all west of the slanted dateline on the New Day side. But the islands Nunivak and King, I don't believe make the cut. Their close proximity to the mainland keeps them a day behind, and that may be scriptural, because now we have islands on both ends of the line the entire way, from the far north to the deep south. Kind of fascinating. Then there's this little guy, Fairway Rock. It's just southeast of the Diomedes, and a slanted dateline goes right through the middle of it, which is kind of interesting, because when I drew a line perpendicular to the dateline to measure the length of the rock from east to west, it came to 444 meters. Though the image on Google Earth is fuzzy, so make of that what you will. But it's close enough for me to think that maybe this desolate rock has a purpose. Maybe the Father placed it here as a boundary stone. Wouldn't that be cool? It is impressive, isn't it? Like a little mountain in the sea. And one more thing. Even though I kept giving exact measurements of where the dateline angled up north, it probably has a more natural curve, if I had to guess. Maybe something like this. Who knows? Here's some of the numbers we kept seeing. 144, 44, 24, and 12. Maybe it's just me, but when I see repeating numbers in a biblical context, it gets me excited, because it makes me think there must be some reason for it. Especially 24 and 12, since we're dealing with the day in this topic. So because of those numbers and the scriptures we looked at, this is where I believe the biblical day begins. So to recap, I believe that Mount Zion is the center of the earth, which means that 180 degrees east or west of it is the edge of the earth, and that's about 145 degrees west. This is the center point where I believe the new day begins. However, the day doesn't begin in a straight line to account for Alaska up north and the islands down south. It has a tilt somewhere between 330 to 333 degrees, starting in the southeast Pacific and extending in a northwest direction. The next day begins in the southern hemisphere, while the current day begins in the northern hemisphere, and it moves upward like the turning of a page. Kind of poetic. That means Easter Island, Central and North America, the islands Unimak, Nunivak, and King end the day, while the new day begins with the Pitcairn Islands, Ducie being first, then the Polynesian Islands to the west, including Hawaii, the Aleutian Islands west of Unimak, the Saintly Islands, and all the way up to the Diomede Islands, and then mainland Russia. From here, the day unfolds as you'd expect. Is my slanted dateline perfect? Maybe not. The numbers are estimates, and the little details are a guess. But for the overall picture, I pray it's close, because it all started with Mount Zion. So whether we're looking at the Polynesian or the Alaskan Islands, I believe what the Bible said is true. The islands truly are the ends of the earth. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, stay in that thin gate.